We're going to cover the filter and EQ effects. If you want to follow along, get Gettysburg 1 and Instrumental Mix. Gettysburg 1 being in the Working Files Narration subfolder, and the Instrumental Mix being inside Music. Just too hard to find right there. All right, let's take a look at these effects. Down in this grouping, we've covered amplitude and compression, delay and echo, and we're skipping diagnostics. I'm going to cover that in a separate section when I talk about getting rid of noises. So we're jumping down to filter and EQ, and there are 6 effects there. 3 graphic equalizers, so they're essentially one effect with just little different options. Another equalizer called the parametric equalizer, and 2 filters, notch and FFT. And what you're going to find out is that despite being called the FFT filter, it really is the FFT filter and equalizer. This guy is the kind of go-to effect here in this group. Let's take a look at these guys in action here. I've got them all loaded up. We'll start with the graphic equalizers, and then we're going to end up with the FFT filter. Double-click on this to open it up and turn it on. And you can see that the graphic equalizer has these sliders, 10 sliders, 1 slider per octave. This is middle C, more or less, a little bit below middle C. And this is an octave below. This is kind of the C in the middle of the bass clef, and here's the high C toward the top of the treble clef. So these guys are all an octave apart. And you can increase or decrease the amplitude of these selected frequencies. And it's not just an individual frequency, it's a range from a half an octave below to a half an octave above. So let me just show you how that works. I'm going to start playing here. I'm going to start adjusting things as we go. So you can see how we emphasize the bass there, kind of a more of a booming bass, and also emphasize the treble end. And this is really common in stereo systems where they've got these equalizers on them. Typically they only have 10 bands. Lots of them have more than 10, but here's the 10-band version here in Audition. Let me switch over to the Gettysburg here. There are some presets on these guys. I'm going to open this guy up and turn it on. There are presets that say something like vocal presence. So you see how that adds a little emphasis right at the 2000 level there. If I go to the vocal presence cut, then it's taking out vocal presence. It's kind of removing the vocal there. We'll go back to the vocal presence and see how that sounds. Let's go over a little bit, try it out. 7 years ago. Turn it off. Our fathers brought forth on this continent a new nation. Slight difference. I might want to emphasize it. I can sort of adjust it as we go. But each of these effects have presets, and most of them have some kind of a vocal side of it as well. Let's close this down. Go back to the instrumental side here. And if I look at the rest of these guys, you'll see that we have 20 bands here. These are half octave separations. And this one is 30 bands. These are third octave separations. So let me close these guys down and move on to the parametric equalizer. Turn this off, go to parametric equalizer. Now, kind of the funny thing is graphic equalizers don't have graphs, they have sliders. Parametric equalizers have a graph, so that can throw you off a little bit. Let me turn on the parametric equalizer by clicking that button there. You see that we have fewer frequency presets here. There are only 5 here in the middle, 1 through 5. And then you've got a low end and a high end. Then you've got what's called the high pass and the low pass. Why would a low pass be on the right side where things are high, and why would a high pass be on the left side where things are low? A high pass means you're passing the high frequencies through, but you're cutting the low pass. So that's a low cut. So we're cutting the low pass really. High pass, low cut. And then low pass equals high cut. So we're cutting the high end and letting the lows go through. Otherwise, we can adjust these guys in the middle. And we can change whatever frequency we want to use. You see the frequencies here, 50, 200, 800. We don't have to use those guys. We can just drag them left or right. And then how much is affected is determined by this Q value down here, the width. Is also referred to as the Q value. The higher the number, the narrower the width. Seems counterintuitive, but that's how it works. And the lower the number, down to the tenth, kind of smooths it out, rounds it out a little bit. So you can decide how much of a frequency you want to lift or drop. That's how that works. Let's just try that out for a while and play with it so you get a sense of how that sounds as well. Something like that. And these little guys here adjust the shape of the curve at the low end and the high end. So if you have these guys moved somewhat, you can click on this to adjust the shape of the curve at the end there. Okay, that is the parametric equalizer. It has some presets. I'm going to go look at the vocal enhancer over here on the other side. So let's take a look at the Gettysburg over there and turn on the parametric equalizer. Turn off the graphic equalizer and try that little preset for the vocal enhancer. Notice what it does there. It drops off the bass and really brings up the treble. Let's try that. 7 years ago.
Our fathers brought forth on this continent.
So here, I'll turn it back on now.
A new nation, conceived in liberty.
So yeah, you can see that the presets are helpful, but again, this is pretty intuitive when you have a graph like that in terms of what areas you want to boost and what areas you want to reduce. So those are equalizers. Let's take a look at the notch filter. The notch filter does kind of what you think it's going to do. It's going to cut out a notch. It's going to remove a narrow frequency band. And it is a narrow band. You can't put on extra points here and spread it out or something like that. There are locations, and you can move those locations around, but you can't adjust these guys up here and add more points. You're limited to these 6 places where you can take certain frequencies out. The default preset has a bunch of these guys set up for 60 cycles with harmonics thrown in, an octave harmonics tossed in here. So why 60 cycles? Because that's the way that electricity works in North America. In Europe, it's 50 cycles. So when you look at the default, you see a lot of 50 cycle things and a lot of 60 cycle things called hertz here, but we're talking electric cycles here. And sometimes if you've got unshielded cables or fluorescent lights, they put out kind of a hum, and the hum will be at 60 hertz plus the harmonics. So you can use the 60 hertz filter to remove that hum. And you can remove it dramatically by increasing the gain that's being reduced, or you can just reduce part of it. But notice as I bring things down here, it's bringing down the gain around it as well. Let's show you what that sounds like. I'm going to close this guy down and bring it over, and we'll see what that sounds like.
7.
Yee, it sounds awful, right? So if you want to reduce just the 60 hertz hum, shift from a narrow notch width to a super narrow notch width, and now that'll take out that hum without really affecting the rest of the audio.
7 years ago.
Sounds pretty good now. So that's how notch filters work. You're able to take out very narrow frequency ranges, and you can adjust the width of those ranges down here. If I go to the vocal side of things, you can see that it doesn't really have much to do with vocals except for taking care of sibilance. And we actually have, that de-esser effect, which is something we can use instead of this. But here's another way to deal with sibilance by going to the vocal side. So let's just turn this guy off. All right, let's go over to the instrumental again and open up the fast Fourier transform filter here. Fast Fourier transform filter really is the jack of all trades. Here, let me close down the parametric equalizer and just focus on the fast Fourier transform filter. It is a blank slate staring at you right now. Just a line, but you can add as many points to this line as you want. And you can increase the amplitude within certain frequency ranges or decrease the amplitude within certain frequency ranges. You can make notch filters here. So the darn thing is a filter and an equalizer built into one despite the name filter. And so that's why I like this guy. You can do basically anything you want with it. There are all kinds of presets. And you notice that it says kill the 60 hertz ground loop. So that's your notch filter part of it. Then you can master, which allows you to do the equalizer part of it. And you can also do some stuff like make some effects. Like, for example, the club downstairs, what that does is it makes it sound like you're hearing something through a wall, for that matter. So it's a great way to, use that if you're making a video trying to show somebody being disturbed by the fact that some guy is playing music in the apartment next door or something like that. Let me switch back to the default for a second. And let's show you how to use this thing. I want to, let's say, emphasize the bass a little bit, emphasize the treble a little bit, just like an equalizer. So I'm going to play this as I start adding some points. Here we go. Something like that. And here we are making these sort of hard angled curves here. You can turn on spline curves. It makes it much smoother rather than those abrupt edges to it. And this works basically like an equalizer. You can specify the frequency that you want to work with by putting in 2 points, and that sort of defines a frequency range right there. And it's a great way to use as an equalizer. If you want to use it as a notch filter, I'll just go back to default. Put in 3 points like so, drag this guy down to wherever you want it to be, and then you can take these corners over to as far to the left there and as far to the right as you can go, and you have now made a notch filter. So that's pretty cool. Let me switch over to the vocal side here, and we'll use the FFT filter there as well. We'll try some presets here. There's some presets for vocal. It says the telephone voicemail. Here we go. Ready for that?
7 years ago.
Yee.
Our fathers.
But that is a cool little effect that's built in. Or you can try one more preset. We've got the kill the mic rumble. Lots of times when you're holding a mic, it kind of puts out this low frequency rumble. And this gets rid of that rumble. Let's see what that sounds like.
Fourscore and 7 years ago.
You know, it's such a low frequency that you won't even hear the difference here. But if you had a microphone that kind of had this really low frequency thing while you shook the microphone, that would take care of that. So there are all kinds of possibilities in the fast Fourier transform filter, and I really think this is your go-to guy. This is the jack of all trades in the filter and EQ group of the Audition effects.